I will get going. Thanks to everybody who's coming in attendance today. Really appreciate it. As always, this is a continuing piece of content from Procurement Foundry, always live. And we've got a really, really special show for you today. We are going to be jumping in with John Goss from Coupa, one of our permanent residence partners. And we will be talking about the 2021 Coupa Business Spend Management Benchmark Report, which I have spent the last week or so diving into. It's absolutely amazing to me, the content and the information that's in here. I think it's going to be a really good conversation. John, thanks for coming. I just want to double check and make sure our live streams are live and that we're good to go on LinkedIn Live as well.
Yeah, we're on LinkedIn Live. We're good.
All right, great. Thank you. As always, Tina's in the background keeping me honest today, so I really appreciate it. So a little bit of housekeeping just for everybody. As you know, Procurement Foundry does our LinkedIn Live sessions. We have a live studio audience here inside of the Zoom room. I ask that, so make sure you say hello to everybody that's inside of the Zoom room. If you're on chat, use chat. If you have questions for John or I that you want to ask, or comments that you want to make associated with some of the things that we are going to pull up and talk about, we would love your engagement. I also ask a lot of questions from time to time associated with benchmarks. Sorry, my hat's stuck in the back of my neck there. But also, we're also monitoring LinkedIn Live. Tina will be monitoring LinkedIn Live for us. If you have questions from the LinkedIn Live audience, by all means, feel free to put them into the chat, and we will try to get your LinkedIn Live in as well. All right, with that said, I am, again, really excited about diving into this benchmark study. Coupa does this on an annual basis. It's got 16 KPIs for us. John, welcome to Procurement Foundry. Thank you to Coupa for being a permanent residence partner. We have done just about everything with Coupa so far. Super excited to have you with us and jumping into this data. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what your position is, Coupa, a little bit about your background, because I know you've been a practitioner for years as well. Tell us a little bit about yourself, John.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited.
Absolutely.
So really, so my name is John Goss, and I am a value solution consultant at Coupa. And really what that is about understanding everything that Coupa does from a software perspective, but from a process perspective, and helping our customers really take their pains, take their problems, things they probably don't even realize that are pains and problems today, identifying them, and then putting a plan into place to solve them. So for me, what's a bit unique is that I used to be a practitioner. Like you said, I've been on the customer side. I selected Coupa, I've implemented it globally, and it's really been a quite interesting 10-year journey for me on both sides of the fence to see all sorts of different customers and processes. I came from the manufacturing space especially, so a lot of things around manufacturing and direct, and I helped a lot with our invoicing process. And we ultimately got to a spot of 100% electronic invoicing. So happy to talk today about some of these benchmarks.
Wow, you got to a place where you had 100% electronic invoicing.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to throw it in there because it seems uncommon, right, to get to that kind of
uncommon.
Right,
bro,
yeah.
That's a unicorn situation.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. Congratulations.
I appreciate that. And I think what's really cool about it is it's not as hard as it sounds, right? Obviously you need good software, you need a good process, but it's about putting a stance forward is the biggest thing that I found, right? So having in your sourcing events, negotiating, you will electronically invoice, right? You will do CXML invoicing with us, right? Having a process where I said, if I get a piece of paper, we're going to throw it out, right? So having some of these firmer stances and saying, these are the ways you must invoice us is how you get to high levels of adoption if it's easy and intuitive and free for the vendors, right? So there's still a mix on all the other ways to make it easy for them, but you got to have that firm stance of this is how invoicing should be done going forward. Yeah.
Wow. Listen, kudos to you, man. That is something that large organizations around the world, mid-sized companies around the world attempt to get to on a daily basis. Some folks don't even attempt it. They stand at the foot of Everest and they're like, listen, there's just no way we're ever going to get here. I'm not even going to try it. I came out of the advertising marketing industry, and media buy is particularly hairy in tracking media buy and being able to do digital representation of media buy.
Yeah.
It's like a Rubik's Cube inside of a Rubik's Cube, actually. So great stuff. Let's talk about the report, the benchmark report. So let's talk a little bit really quickly and lay some groundwork for people on the methodology associated with this report. I think people probably want to hear about this. So this information comes out of the communal intelligence side of Coupa, right?
Yeah. Yeah, really. So community is a huge, important thing for Coupa, right? It's not about just individual customers and what an individual customer has done as a snapshot, right? Like I said, 100%. It's about what is attainable in a large amount of organizations, right? So community intelligence to us is looking across all of the data across all of our over 2,000 customers and saying, okay, for the leaders that are focusing on these key areas, what are they on average accomplishing? And that's what this benchmark report is. But what's important is we develop this and we put it out there into the market so that everybody knows what is attainable, what is a realistic goal using modern software in these spaces. For all of our customers, it's actually, this report is more real time in the system. It's not even like a yearly publication. It's there, they can see it, they can see how they're tracking against it. So for this, it's really focused on just getting a conversation started the same way we're doing today to think about what is possible.
So do you charge for this report? Do you charge for this report? Is it available to anybody? I mean, I know it's based on Coupa data, but the essence of this report really is, and I know because I've been with the sponsorship of Procurement Foundry, I get access to some of the senior leadership over at Coupa, just like I do with all of our sponsors. And what's really interesting to me is that the leadership team over there almost feels like they have a fiduciary responsibility to tell the industry about what they're seeing, because they have, insights into what's going on in the industry that a lot of folks, quite honestly, don't have, just because of the sheer magnitude of what's going through Coupa, right? I mean, it's kind of like Procurement Foundry in a way too. I mean, we have so much collaboration and communication that's taking place inside of Procurement Foundry. I almost feel some type of industry responsibility to tell people what's going inside of the community so that they'll come in and even get more knowledge. So, I mean, that's basically the genesis of this whole thing, right? Is this overarching responsibility of the industry that you have?
Yeah, you're spot on, right? I mean, we think of business spend management of a place that hasn't really been brought together well in the past. And we need to think about it as a holistic approach and understand what is attainable within this world and share it with everybody, right? Not charge for it, not keep it behind this secret sauce or something like that, right? Because to be completely honest, when I go and talk to customers, if they say, hey, press all these buttons, or I know the exact buttons I need, those customers aren't really on a path to be successful. But if they say, hey, here's the things I'm trying to accomplish, how can you help me get to these goals? They're always successful, always going down the right path and making sure that they're open to get to the outcome that they're setting out for, right?
Yeah. I'm interested. I do this a lot. I don't know if you've ever watched one of my my AMA or webinars before. I ask the folks that are monitoring. I mean, we've got 20, 25 people here. We've got another 15, 20 people inside of the room. I'm super excited to ask the folks, do me a favor. If you're in the Zoom room right now, please put this into the chat. If you're on LinkedIn, come back and put it inside of LinkedIn for me. How many of you have actually downloaded and looked at this thing? And how many of you have read the benchmark report before? Because if you haven't, I think over the next 30 to 45 minutes, we're going to show you some stuff that's going to make you want to go and check this out. So I'm interested to see how many folks have actually pulled this down and who are aware of it, because there's a lot of what I'm seeing discussed inside of Procurement Foundry associated with expectations and KPIs that I think some of the answers are here, or at least some of the best practices are here, or I don't know if they're best practices, aggregated vision of what is capable, I think is probably the best description.
Yeah,
right?
I think you're spot on. I think really the way this report is designed is to understand, here's a thing that's accomplishable. What does it mean? What does this metric mean? And then how do you do better at that metric, right? To try and make it easy to understand, easy to apply without needing a conversation with Coupa to get it going, right? But think about it yourself of, these are areas I should probably improve on based on how we're doing today, right? And this is some first steps I can take.
Yeah, cool. All right, so let's dive into this a little bit. And I know that your role at Coupa really is to talk about people about how best to engage the solution and how the value comes out of that. So we'll bounce back and forth if it's okay with you. I'm going to start to literally pull up the report and start to dive into some things. Let me just make sure I can share my screen here. Sorry, I don't share my screen very much in these discussions. Okay, can everybody see the report? You can see it, right, John?
Yeah, I see it. Yep.
Awesome. So great cover page. I don't care about cover pages. That's fantastic. What I like is, okay, we got a really interesting table of contents. This thing is pretty comprehensive when it comes to reports and KPIs from an operations perspective. And as a former chief procurement officer, it's pretty easily chewable. I could look at this over dinner and I don't, it's a light read, but at the same time, if you're a practitioner in this space, this stuff is pretty easy to recognize. Some great areas to cover: source to contract procurement. I'm going to try and touch base on all of these things. And by the way, if anybody has any questions in the feed or if in the room, please let me know if there's a specific area that you want to talk. I can't get to all 16 of these, but I am going to try my best. So source to contract procurement, supplier and third-party risk, invoicing. You've got some KPIs associated with expenses, which I think is great. And the one kind of the granddaddy of them all down here at the bottom is going to be payments. Invoices paid digitally. We're going to get to that because that's a massive opportunity in the marketplace, in my opinion. Let's start at the top, though, and get real simple. We can show people what this thing actually looks like. I want to talk about structured spend for a second. And by the way, I don't know who does the layout of your slides, but I love this.
Yeah, I really agree.
So kudos to your marketing team or to your PowerPoint freak that you have. God bless them. They're fantastic. This is really, really nice stuff. So your KPI on this is structured spend equals 66.5%. Okay. I don't know if we need the decimal point. It's a little, OCD for me, but okay, that's fine. Let's talk a little bit about structured spend and tell me what this KPI actually means for somebody that's a practitioner. Yeah. We got lone wolves in the room, meaning we got individuals who are running procurement departments all by themselves, all the way up to some of the really, really big procurement organizations that are out there today. So talk to me a little bit about structured spend.
Yeah, I really like this one because previously we would have called this something like on catalog rate, right? So it's about getting transactions into a format where you know the vendor, you know the pricing likely, you have a plan of where you want it to go, right? We changed it to be structured spend because we realized that actually about 70% of the spend going through Coupa was service-based spend, right? Whether that's through things like contingent labor or complex forms that have statement of works. And dependent on how you're answering some of these questions, it might guide you to a different rate or to maybe even different vendor, a different answer, right? Or different involvement from certain teams. And the idea is getting that structured means a user searches, they find something, they fill in a handful of questions or they add it to their cart and they go on to doing their job, right? They don't have to sit here and be in the procurement system all day, every day. So they get to be a scientist or they get to be somebody in their retail location, right? So the idea is keeping it structured. And the two big values I really like out of this is definitely getting price compliance, but more importantly, I think the two ones are agility, meaning that when you need to switch from Granger to MSC based on your cost savings, or you have a different vendor that can provide you with PPE and it's not the one that the users are used to buying from, you make that change. And because it's the user's already trained, go to this place, you'll find it. They don't care what the logo of the vendor is or the name of the vendor is there. They know if I search here, I'll go and find it at this location, right? The other big thing is things like availability, right? For some of those vendors, right, especially PPE, but like MRO and things like that, if you don't have a structured approach of understanding this vendor's catalogs or their offerings or their punch outs, right, you don't know, do they have this in stock? Is it going to get here in time for when I need it, right? And by having this stuff more structured, you're able to get access to those other insights too, right? And there's all this depth of whether it's on a form or it's on a hosted catalog, right, where you load an Excel sheet of your data, or a punch out catalog where I go click a button and it shows me their website and I have to search all the stuff there. All of those are structured spend, but really the one I like the best is something we call open buy, but it's the idea of taking the ease of punch outs and searching across them. So getting all of that into, regardless, one search bar is the outcome you want with this metric, right?
Yeah, I like it a lot. What I find really intriguing about this is that, for my mind, structure spend for me was all about catalogs and punch outs, and now it's not just catalog and punch outs, right? Yeah. There's a lot more to that, and because of that, you've had to kind of expand the definition, if you will, to do that. What kind of was some of the driving factors on that for you?
Yeah, I think it's really just the fact that, I mean, to be completely honest, when we go in and we talk to customers and sometimes they say, hey, don't show me anything about laptops or paper or any of this stuff, because I don't buy those. All I buy is services, and I buy software, and I buy $1 million projects. And we say, well, great. So this is how we would structure that spend. And it's right. It is correct. It's the way you should be buying that powerful spend, right? So it's a good thing to be tracking. The interesting thing is it definitely changes the denominator there too, because now there's all this spend that we can consider addressable, right? Rather than saying I have 95% of my spend catalog managed, it's like, yeah, but you had 95% of the stuff you could have catalog managed, you know? So this is it's a bigger task, but it's a more honest reward when you get to the end of it, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Okay. So the next one I want to talk about here is literally the next slide, which is on contract spend. This is a big thing for us, right? As procurement practitioners, one of the things that we hate to do, and I know tons of people that are watching do this all the time. You go out and you kill yourself to get. Sorry, hold on one second. I'm seeing there's a lot of chatter, by the way. So LinkedIn inside the room, lots of chatter. Familiar with the report, but haven't downloaded it yet. Interested in seeing the results. So I'm glad that you're getting to see it here. Somebody says, could we get a copy of the report? Absolutely, we can get you a copy of the report, Alejandra. We can send you to, I think Tina has a link somewhere. We can get you a link. I can post it inside. I think the link to the results, to the report, is actually already in the Coupa channel inside of Procurement Foundry. John probably doesn't even know this, because this is the first time I've actually, we did a pre-run through on this, but John doesn't know this. So John, inside of the Procurement Foundry, what we have is something that we affectionately call the petting zoo, which is we allow Coupa to have a channel inside of our Slack community so that you guys can put information in. We can continue the conversations after things like this. But what you can't do is you can't come into the private sector of the Procurement Foundry, where all of our members are chatting on about 80 or 90 different topics at any given day. So we allow our members to go in and pet the fuzzy bunnies associated with the Coupa content and meet the Coupa people, but then the bunnies don't follow you back out into the.
I think that's so cool. Yeah, it's really cool.
So it creates a really balanced ability for us to be able to engage the vendor population as we want. Our strategic partners, our permanent residence partners, but then at the same time still continues to give us that safe haven of where all of the practitioners get to collaborate. And I'm sure as a fellow practitioner, former practitioner, you can probably understand the need for
completely
that.
agree. Yeah, I completely agree.
Cool.
Makes a lot of sense.
So we will definitely get you access to a link for that. Oh, there you go, benchmark report. Thank you, Peter, for getting that to us. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is on-contract spend. And the reason why and I'll pull up the slide, on-contract spend for me has always been a nightmare. I had a team of, 20 or 30 people. We'd go out there and kill ourselves on these contracts. And then we'd find all sorts of spend that was taking place either in new merger and acquisition, or people who just weren't, we were trying to educate, but we have a 20% attrition rate. Nobody goes to our portal, and now all of a sudden they're not buying off a contract, right? I mean, the worst thing that can happen is you go out and kill yourself and create an amazing contract, and you don't get the discounts because the spend isn't on contract.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're spot on, right? I think this is probably one of, if not the most important metric on this report, but this is one we've all talked about for a long time, and it's structured spend definitely influences this, right? The more you have structured, the easier this becomes, right? But you can still have contract-based spend that's not necessarily structured, right? Like a lot of things like direct materials tend to be contracted. It has to be, right? It has to go through quality checks and all these other things. But the idea for contract spend is it's both of locking in that savings, right? But also making sure that you don't have risk, right? It's making sure, as we'll talk about risk later, the idea is that you have vetted these suppliers. You know these are the ones we should work with. You know that these are the ones that have the correct practices. Maybe you know that these are diverse suppliers you want to push spend to. These are where your contracts are designed to be pushing your spend, not, well, this supplier has this item and maybe this individual item's cheaper and I can buy it from them, right? So it's getting all of that goodness that procurement and sourcing do and influencing it here. And I think one of the scariest things I see is if organizations say, I went out and bought a great sourcing tool and I've sourced a lot of spend and I got a lot of savings. You didn't get savings yet, right? This is when you get savings. This is when you have actually spent money to those agreements that you've negotiated. That's when savings has been realized. So they're really joint together, is the sourcing and procurement space has to be together in order to get the savings actually realized.
Yeah. Interesting. I want to ask everybody that's here in the room. I want to ask the people that are up on LinkedIn. 79.6% on contract spend is a big number. I want to know how people feel about that. Here's my question, and just reply inside of the feeds, inside of the chat, or inside of the feed on LinkedIn. Are you a buy, sell, or hold on 79.6%? It's a yes, and for me, it's a absolutely a no or a you got to be kidding me answer. So buy, sell, or hold, please. Really appreciate that, and I will come back in as I see that feed, and we'll tell people what they're thinking. Yeah, so for me, the interesting part about this again with this study is this is really what's possible, right? This isn't like so first things first. And there's a lot of people out there, and we get people inside of the procurement foundry every day, right? That are, oh my God, I'm going to work for a company for the first time. My chief financial officer or my chief operation officer just asked me to design what the strategy is going to be for the next 12 months. This is a great place. This is a great report to look at to get the KPIs. And now I'm not going to recommend to you as a former practitioner. Hold on, I'm going to take this off the screen so you can all see my face. I am not going to recommend to you as a former chief procurement officer and manage multiple billions of dollars worth of spend that you attempt on day one to give your CFO 16 KPIs that you need to manage yourself to. If you do that, you are setting yourself up for failure. I'm going to tell you right now. What you can do is you can go into something like this industry-wide recognized report and be able to take 4, 6. You want to get really ambitious, take 8, but get 4 and kill them. Then put 2 more in place for next year. Report against them. Make sure you feel comfortable with that, right? I mean, this is the way. This is a way in which somebody can really build a future for themselves by, number one, figuring out what the KPIs are. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't even know what KPIs to measure themselves against, right, John?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it just to real quick on there. I think what's so important is this is what's attainable. This isn't like a cherry picked one customer got to this number and we say, let's go put that on a slide, right? There's a lot of customers on average are accomplishing things like this, right? So this is attainable. I understand everybody's going to hedge their bets, right? And they're going to say, instead of 80%, I'm going to commit to my CFO 70%, right? Or something like that. But the idea is that at least you know that you're hedging your bets and you're not guessing and hoping that you'll get to something magical out there and have no idea if you will or not, right?
Right. Got a question. So where does spend that is under contract but purchased via catalog fall? Contract spend or structured spend?
Spend that is under contract and not on a catalog. Is that what the question said?
Where does spend that is under contract? By the way, thanks, Mike, for this. So where does spend that is under contract but purchased via a catalog fall? Is it contract spend or structured spend?
Yeah, it's both. So that's important.
I was going to say, it sounds like both.
It is. Yeah. So that's why. So pretty much all of structured spend is a subset of on contract spend. And then there's this extra boost of it was on a contract, but we made a contract one-off for this purchase. And there wasn't really a plan to go there. There wasn't some guidance or some controls. We just made a contract for this. So you're absolutely correct. It's on contract and on catalog. It is on both.
How does that work, right? So okay, so you got structured spend. I went out, I negotiated an agreement with Office Depot or somebody else, Staples. I'll give equal billing to both, right?
Perfect.
Okay. I signed a contract with whichever one of the two companies I chose. And yeah, okay, so I got a punch out catalog. 90%, 80% of that goes through the punch out catalog, right? It's on contract spend. But then I got somebody sitting in their house and they go to the staples.com and they just swipe an American Express corporate card and it ends up in the T&E system.
Yeah.
That spend that ends up in the T&E system isn't necessarily on contract spend, right?
Yeah, correct. It depends on how it was purchased, right? So if I know that I'm supposed to buy from Staples and then I don't use the contracted rate through my procurement system, and I just physically go to a Staples or I go to staples.com and I use my credit card and it's on T&E, I didn't use the contracted rates that we negotiated, right? So it's not on contract. So while there was a structure and there was a plan, I didn't use it, right? Which is where that right there, that's the crux of the market, right? Of procurement is it's got to be the easiest way for me to buy it is the right way, right? It's got to be so much easier for me to do it the correct way that my company wants me to do it, rather than I can just go online and swipe my card, right? The system should do that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The system should be able to, it should be intelligent enough to be able to do that. I got another question coming in from LinkedIn, and I apologize. I'm paying attention, but I have to read at the same time.
Good. You got multiple places to go.
This is the only place where my ADHD kicks in and it works.
Right. Yeah.
It's in this and the craps table, because blackjack is too slow for kids with ADHD. You know that. Okay, so Jason, online on LinkedIn, curious if this metric includes contracts not negotiated by procurement. I'm assuming it's spend on contract spend that we're still talking about. Curious if this metric includes contracts not negotiated by procurement, e.g. situations where executives and other parts of the company sign a contract outside of the procurement process.
Yeah, so it can, right? It's there are actually even subsets within this. This one would consider the fact that you have an agreement, you know what the rate is supposed to be, and you are buying based on that rate, right? Regardless if it was a procurement rate or an executive rate, or the user did it themselves because they're an engineer and they have great friends in their company, but they have a rate that they're supposed to be buying against, right? Doesn't mean that that's the best rate, right? We know the procurement would have gotten them a better rate, right? So that's where you talk about things like, even one of the earlier metrics, the contract cycle time, is if your contract cycle time is too long and it takes too much effort for procurement to get these done, people do them on their own and you leave savings on the table. But that would be considered on contract spend, right?
Yeah. So thanks for that, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for the question, Jason. I appreciate it. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to jump into another one of the metrics here we can chat about. And again, I'm not touching all of them. Just do yourself a favor. I understand. I'm personally not a big fan of gated content on the internet. You all know that. I've expressed that opinion before. This is one of those things that I would actually say is okay. I went up a couple of days ago. I downloaded it. I got some information. I haven't been bludgeoned by the CRM gods yet. I keep an email address just for that, just to see how bad the gating is. And this is one that I don't put my name out there very often for content, but this is one I actually went up and checked out. So definitely think it's worth it from the gating side of it. All right, next one I want to talk about is requisition to order cycle time. Okay, so I'm going to dive down in. I'm going to jump out of source to contract. We're going to get into procurement, the procurement aspect of this study. This benchmark report. This is part of the procurement piece. Requisition to order cycle time. This to me, and I don't want to kill this topic very much, but this to me is an amazing number. Almost to the point where I almost threw a 15-yard penalty and called BS on it. Requisition to order cycle time, 4.2 business hours from the time that you get requisition to order. I have been known to say that the request to acquisition process is like chewing glass in a lot of companies. So this is another one of those situations where, hey, listen, this is just a very large organization that has access to a ton of information, happens to be a P2P corporation somewhere inside of our industry, who is saying, listen, this is possible, right? This probably isn't happening in 80% of the companies that are out there in America today, right? If we're being honest. But what's really interesting is just to look at this for a second and go, so basically what this is saying is that based on all of the participants of your platform, they're seeing a 4.2 business hour time cycle associated with requisition to order.
Yeah, I absolutely love this metric. And the cool thing about this to me is, and you don't get that out of even this slide, last year it was around 7 hours. And before that, it was about 10 hours and then 16 hours. And the idea is that it's faster. It's getting much, much faster, right? And what's so neat is when you start tracking something and you start looking at it and thinking about it, both as a procurement team, you figure out, how do I make this better? But for us as a software vendor, we think, well, how do we make that better, right? And one of the cool things that I found most impactful about this is sharing it and talking about it. And in particular, putting it on approvals. So I'll give you a real example in my life. So whenever we have approvals, if I'm going to buy something, clearly I use Coupa, right? And there's a purchase approval, and for somebody in my leadership who's going to remain nameless, there's a little insight there that says how often, how long it takes them to approve on average, right? And what the actual average is per person. And the actual average per person is around 3 hours, a little bit less. And when we first came out with that insight in the approval button itself, right next to the button that says approve, his was 76 hours to approve on average. And he's like, well, that's not great. So he's like, I thought 3 days was fine. What do you mean 3 days isn't fine to approve something? That's how it's always been. It seems like I'm doing better than a week, which is what it was before. And he realized that he's not doing as well as all of our customers. So he's gotten much better. And for us, it's things like gamification of, we put a little red turtle next to it to say you're slow, right? Or you put a green rabbit next to it to say you're fast, right? And people just naturally say, oh, I didn't realize I was doing poor here. I want to do better. And then they do, right? And it's so simple that until you talked about what an appropriate metric is, they thought 3 days was fine, right? That's why I love this metric and how it's consistently getting better, is just super small tweaks like that, right? Make it work.
So I love the fact that you give somebody a turtle after a certain amount of time.
Oh, yeah.
What is the threshold for getting the turtle?
It's just, are you worse than the community average, right?
Okay.
There's a lot of turtles.
All right. So it goes corporate wide,
Yeah.
right? On a distributed approval process basis, it goes corporation wide.
Yeah.
And you get access to, okay, hey, you're a turtle.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, one of our executives, I'm not gonna call out who, is a turtle, and he's still better. He's not quite down to the 3 hours he's supposed to be getting to per person, but he's still turtle, right?
So that's a great metric. I would love to be able to go, and this is something that I'm really, really interested in because, like I said, as a former practitioner, one of the biggest things that we used to have trouble with is travel approvals for expenditures, right?
Yeah.
Which could go through a flow like this.
Yeah.
And we used to have people who were deadly slow on travel payments associated with T&Es.
Yeah.
And there were people who you probably needed a dead turtle icon for,
Yeah.
not just a turtle icon, but a dead turtle icon.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that you can gamification that out. I hadn't even actually thought of that, but the fact that you actually have thought of that, that's a great, great best practice. I love it.
It's so neat, right? And it's just the idea that previously, before these insights were out there and in the actual transaction, the procurement team would say, man, they're really slow at approving. I don't like that person. That person had no idea that they were slow, right? They didn't know this wasn't an appropriate amount of time. But even on the expenses approvals you're talking about, especially in that world, that's actually one of the metrics later, but we can talk about it here too, is the idea that having expense approvals be faster means people have faith that they will get reimbursed faster. Whereas if expense approvals take a week, I'm going to submit my expense report once a month or once every few months, right? I'm not going to come in and submit it right after my trip's done or right after I have this purchase, because why bother? It's going to take a week anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. Why bother, right? And then you start to get rogue spend, or you start to get people who, are doing something else on a separate, whatever they're doing. There's people who try to work their way around that all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, wow, the chatter on LinkedIn is unbelievable. Jason from Boston is throwing a lot of stuff out, saying metrics. Do the metrics potentially need an asterisk that identify by industry? It would be really interesting to see this broken out by industry, actually, because in the financial system space, financial services space, the number is very hard to get to and still meet regulatory requirements around third-party management, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, realistically, this benchmark report is to start a conversation, right? We have data across industries and much more granular behind the scenes too, right? And even, our customers that use Coupa, there's a little tab that says industry, and they pick their industry, and all of a sudden all these benchmarks change, right? Because that's what's appropriate for them. If we put out one that was sliced by every single industry, you'd have hundreds of pages of stuff. It'll be a little bit harder to digest.
Yep. Hold on. I'm going to keep flipping through here. I want to jump into the next one.
Yep.
Okay. So, pre-approved spend for me, 96.7%. Yeah. Okay. I mean, listen, if you got a good tool that ties into your budgeting tool, and you got a good process, and you've got a P2P system fully deployed, I'd expect pre-approved spend to be pretty high, right?
Yeah.
You can't go into a marketplace or a punch out and order something if it isn't against a pre-approved budget. I mean, there's different ways to skin this cat, right? Pre-approved spend could be a blanket PO for the entire year for, again, I'm gonna keep going back to office supplies.
Yeah, sure.
It's just easy to say that, right? You could have a PO in the system for X, millions of spend, and everybody who's buying off of that is pre-approved. I would expect this number to be pretty high.
Yeah, I always think this one's really funny, right? So if you have a non-PO invoice that comes into your world to approve, when's the last time those have ever been rejected, right? So
I'm sorry, you want to repeat that again?
Yeah, so if you have a non-PO invoice that says, hey, here's this, consultant we hired, or here's all this stuff, and it comes in and you look at it, when's the last time that stuff's ever been rejected, right?
Oh, never.
It doesn't.
Because in theory, if you're at the invoice point, you're contractually obligated to the
Exactly.
Somebody made a commitment on an email,
Yeah.
or or the services have been delivered, and at that point, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, do you want to be taken to court for not paying an invoice? First off, do you want to be known as a deadbeat who didn't pay the invoice because
Yeah.
of an internal policy and you didn't educate your staff right? That's
Exactly.
one problem, right? And then number two, do you want to actually spend the money in your internal legal counsel to go try and actually to fight something so that you can get, unless it's a really big invoice.
Sure.
And odds are you're not going to get a really big invoice that somebody didn't already approve. So it's kind of like,
Yeah, so then what do? You just kind of approve it, right? And so to me, is that, it's called post-approved spend. Is it post-approved? No, it has to happen, right? So you don't have an opportunity to reject it, therefore you shouldn't consider it approved, right? But the other flip side to that is, well, what happens if you start getting fraudulent invoices that are non-PO? And you have that same exact emotional response of, well, we got to approve this anyway, right? So now that's where you see fraud of suppliers or one-time vendors or organizations sending in invoices and getting paid for stuff that you're like, yeah, it's probably fine, because I know that every time I go down this path, I never fix it, right? So there's things that we start thinking of is looking at, again, using machine learning and understanding, looking across all this data and saying, these look kind of like duplicate invoices, or these look fraudulent, whether it's intentional or unintentional, you probably shouldn't be paying these things. So definitely first approach is get everything pre-approved if you can, right? Get it on blanket POs, get it on virtual cards, get it on things like that. Those are great. But this other side is, if it's not pre-approved and it's a non-PO invoice, how do you understand what you should be doing with it? Should you be rejecting these? Are these duplicate? Are these fraudulent, right? And that's an area that nobody really looks at. They just kind of say, just leave it over there. I'm going to focus on the side that I'm happy with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump into risk management for a minute, because risk management is huge now for a number of reasons. But you got GDPR and personally identifiable information associated with it. You've got the onslaught of SaaS, right, which now creates even more risk management. 30% of everybody that's out there is deploying systems and software packages, whether it's MarTech, FinTech, BiTech. That's my word, by the way, BiTech, and or even HR tech and some of the others. Literally everything is a piece of technology.
Yeah.
And the majority of those technology companies are either in Series A or Series B funding rounds, right? And I've talked about this before. I think we're one financial turn away from money drying up inside of the VC space, and that causes a major run on SaaS organizations. And that creates a major amount of risk in the marketplace, right?
Sure.
So more and more people now, and it's a big topic inside of the community, are designing risk management programs, trying to find KPIs associated with risk management programs, trying to find people that they can staff up into their staff that have risk management and risk evaluation experience.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of that already in the supply chain space, in the direct side, because they just had to have, if you're building a combine harvester somewhere in the Midwest and it happens to be painted green, I'm not going to say the name of the company, but if you don't have green paint, you can't sell the combine harvester.
Yeah,
so you've got to worry about the risk side of it, right? But I'm seeing it more and more in the indirect side as well now, where risk mitigation and risk strategies are coming to market. So I want to touch on this a little bit. I want to run through a couple of the risk management KPIs that are in here, because I think this is really good for people to take a look at as well. Sorry, I keep flipping back and forth between the two shot of you and I and then going back out to the slide. I'm trying to find a better way to do this. So there's an entire section of this benchmark study on third-party risk, which I like. The first one here is around supplier information management cycle, right?
Yeah.
This is huge. Chasing down suppliers to get their information is a train wreck, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And there's I mean, I know you folks do it. I know there's some best-in-class organizations out there that are trying to get better at this. There's some, vendor relationship management softwares out there that do that. I know you've got that fully incorporated into your system. But again, just something to chew on. When you're doing this right, the people that are doing this the best are doing this in 1.8 hours of time.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting with this, so like I said, I talked to a lot of customers and prospective customers, and my favorite question to ask around this topic is, for the vendor master team, how often have you asked for a vendor's data and they ignored you, right? And they didn't respond. And every single time they all laugh, and like always, it happens all the time, where vendors literally just ignore us when we want to work with them.
Exactly.
And it's because you don't have an active purchase or an active invoice or something immediate, right? So if you're onboarding a vendor, you can kind of finagle it and explain to them, this is what I need to do. But even for like updates, right? Certificates of insurance or diversity or changing bank data and stuff like that, right? These are things that need to be fast too. And what we found is that, at least in our world, by joining the vendor management process with things like invoicing and procurement. So whenever you create an invoice electronically, it says, hey, great, you made an invoice, but you're not going to get paid unless you update your information. They say, well, shoot, man, I want to get paid right now. I need to get paid. So I'm going to go update that immediately. And you have that right time participation where now the actual information is filled in because the vendor feels like they need to in order to get paid, rather than this disjointed off to the corner, please do this, I'm going to ignore it for a while, right? It's all, that's why the speed's getting faster and faster for here too, is you got to have that combined spend management approach rather than these pieces, right?
Yeah, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. Keeping up, getting the data in the system is one thing, right? Getting the system, so I mean, vendor data is I hate to keep going and saying it, but it's a train wreck, man. It's a nightmare to try and manage that. If you're a smaller shop, I mean, like you said something about, okay, who your data, your vendor data manager, right? I mean, do you know how many organizations they're not even close to having something like that.
Yeah, they don't even have, it's an AP clerk, right?
So it's an AP clerk or procurement, it's part of the procurement onboarding process or something like that, right? But one of the things you said, I wrote down almost immediately, was bank data, right? Banking data. Huge situation that's been around for a couple of years and continues to fester is around fraud associated with bank data. If you don't have this thing locked down, I've heard of scenarios where people get calls from vendors and they say, hey, we got net 60-day payment terms and we're out 180 days on our payables right now to you. We're just wondering, is everything all right? Can we get a check sometime in the near future? And the accounts payable manager calls back and goes, what are you talking about? We got you current. We've wired you the funds to the bank account, so you changed. But we have a change on your. So if you're not doing that in a really structured way, you could be shipping money off to a third-party bank account somewhere in the Caymans. Gone.
When you're emailing around Word documents, right? Like there's not security in that, right? It's not getting controls. It's not getting it going to the right people. And I think what's even exciting about this is, so holistically, the market, right? Everybody thinks about, how do I make my end users happier and have an easier time? How do I make my sourcing team have an easier time? How do I make my accounts payable team and my admins have an easier time, and my approvers? Very rarely do we think about, how is it easier for the supplier, right? We think about, well, they need to do this because I'm the customer and I'm right? But the idea here is, Coupa's thinking about, well, why can't it be easy for the vendor to do some of this stuff, right? And one of the coolest things I've seen recently, and just gives me hope for where the world's going, is if a vendor has multiple customers using our same supplier portal, why can't it start suggesting the information they key in for everybody, right? We're already starting to go down that path of saying, hey, you've already filled in this information. This is what we think you're trying to fill in here. Does this look good? And you say, yeah. When you do that in your Google Forms and you autofill all the same stuff all the time, right? And how much does that make your life better to be able to not have to key in your home and your address and all this stuff everywhere you go every single time? It's awesome, right? So that space of thinking about, can the vendor have an easier time here, is something that the question needs to be asked, right? And we're starting to.
Yeah. Listen, I know during GDPR, for example, some of the GDPR requirements and some of the liability clauses associated with GDPR have actually, so some of the large tech houses, right? A lot of the large tech houses who will remain nameless right now use third-party coders and third parties to code out pieces of their software.
Yeah.
So let's say you're a tech shop that's got 20, 30, 40 different SKUs. I won't name names. And you've got an industry standard product that's been around for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there's some new functionality that's available and you've got a team that you're gonna, try and partner with to do that. There's real problems in attempting to contract and do business with those small companies because of the requirements of the liability clause requirements. So because of GDPR, because there really isn't a lot on GDPR, to the point where they're actually walking away from those large companies because of those requirements, and it's causing a blockage in that. I think this is where Jason was going with this. And Jason, thanks. Just chime in here in the stream on LinkedIn. Tell me if you're still here. Wow, we're up to almost 30 people on LinkedIn. That's cool, man. That's great. That's a big number considering we fight the algorithm every day. Which I think I'm going to get T-shirts made to say "Fight the algorithm."
Fight the algorithm.
Yeah,
everything. It's everything in the world, right?
I think that's going to be my submission to the NFT world is going to be an NFT that says "Fight the algorithm" on it.
I like it.
So I think this is the screen, and I think I got this shared, right? Do I have this shared?
Yeah,
Am I just talking to myself?
Yep.
Okay. Risk management evaluation time cycles. So this is definitely one that I agree with Jason on. This is specific to industries.
Very
We've
much.
got highly regulated industries, governmental, academia, financial services organizations where this is going to change. This, in my opinion, would be a fantastic. This slide in itself is probably a 60-minute panel discussion.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, even in this, we see really everybody should be able to manage risk quickly, right? But we see that more risk is managed in financial institutions and things like that, like you just said, right? So the idea with this, though, is if it takes too long to do, you have less vendors you have time to go and look at, right? And it's not just I need to know how my third parties are doing. I need to know how my fourth parties and how the vendors of my vendors and how they're doing in these spaces, right? So getting to that depth is critical. But we do definitely see a huge lean into the financial world is why these numbers are actually getting faster too. That's definitely a great point.
Yep. Quick question while I have it, really timely, not necessarily associated with risk management. Is there a KPI in the future associated with the report associated with diversity related spend or something along that line?
Yeah, so absolutely going to be. I think there's so much coming around diversity of information that we already know as Coupa. And there's the line of, well, what have you validated as a customer versus what we know who is diverse and who you haven't validated yet. Definitely something that will be coming in the future.
Mm-hmm. What about sustainability?
Yeah, same thing. Again, those are critical when we think about managing suppliers, right? And managing contracts. Right. Earlier, we think about contract spend is it's got to go to the cheapest, right? But now we're thinking of it's got to go to the most sustainable. It's got to go to diverse vendors if we can, right? It's got to go to local vendors, all sorts of things that we're trying to push to. And not just this big checkbox of diverse, but all of the different certifications, right? That's where spend needs to be pushing towards. So that way, when you think of the risk side, it's not just do I get my green paint for my tractor, right? It's about, is my company's reputation going to go downhill because I don't buy from any diverse vendors and I buy from any sustainable vendors, right? That's way impactful. And as soon as that gets into the news, your company's going to be in a lot of trouble, right?
Yeah. Comment online here. Okay, and I apologize. I'm going to go back to that. No, we're still here. I'm sorry. What's missing in the risk management evaluation cycle time is the time it takes to review, approve the documents. Just because a supplier submits a SOC 2 type 2 report in 44.2 hours doesn't mean that it gets immediately approved. Is that true? Is that a new nuance inside of the data there?
Yeah, so the evaluation is still end to end. So it is including getting it the whole way back in and getting it to an approved status. But the idea is that not every single risk evaluation is a SOC 2, right? There's definitely some that are much more complicated and some that are going to be faster that make that an aggregate metric. But I
Right.
completely agree. I mean, your SOC 2 is going to probably take more than 2 days to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to. We amazingly we only have 9 minutes left. And I knew this could have been a 2-hour run. I'm gonna jump through because I want to talk. There's a couple things I want to jump through. Just gonna bang through a couple of slides here.
Sure.
Invoice approval time cycle 10.5 hours.
Yep.
Wow. I don't know that there's a lot of companies that are hitting that. I'm super excited that that's the norm inside of an aggregated P2P visibility like that. Again, I think that there's a lot of companies that need to strive to that. I don't think they're even close to that. I love the idea of having turtles. Again, that's going to go out for triple match.
Spot on, right?
But there's a lot of dead turtles out there, right?
But real quick on this first time match rate, I think is important because the higher this gets, the faster your cycle time for invoice approval, right? Because if your invoices are coming in and they're not matching and we're not sure, or they're non-PO and we don't really know what the price is supposed to be, you can't get that stuff approved quickly, right? So by having things be electronic, having a higher first time match rate, your invoice approvals are going to follow with that and be faster. And these are also very, very tightly tied together, which gets back into that comment I said before, is thinking about what is easier for the supplier and for the vendor, right? Rather than just do it this way because I told you to, which is honestly what I did when I was a customer. There's got to be a smarter way to say, do it this way because it's easiest and you as a vendor get the most value out of it, right? Which is where we really get to now.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to jump out of that. Next section in this is expenses. Again, I love the way this is structured. I can very easily climb through it. Expense report approval cycle, 6.5 business hours. I got to be honest with you. I managed $150 million a year in corporate travel when I was with my last firm. I am going to tell you that less than 1% of my, now I did not have a P2P system. I did have a very large deployment of the #1 T&E management system on the planet, as you can imagine. Is the 6.5 hours of business time, bro.
It's the same stuff there, right? So like the reason we have it all in the same report and the reason we have it all as a company is if I'm going to approve my expenses or I'm going to approve my purchases or I'm going to approve my invoices or supplier onboarding or contracts or any of that stuff, why can't I just do it in one place and it's my approval system, right? And now this is tied to if requisitioning and invoicing are getting better, this is getting better too, right? It's just got to be intuitive on my phone in an app, all in one place.
Yep. I love the fact that you do in policy lines. This is a great number. I would expect this to be high. Anybody that's running a system like this probably has the checks and balances in place to be at this level. But what's interesting to me is that it's not 100%. Right?
I completely agree. What I find really interesting about this is it's not on this slide. The things that are in policy, but just in policy, those are a bit suspicious, right? Where, hey, you're barely meeting the requirements, or, you have a self-approval limit of $1,000. Why is all your stuff at $999 all of a sudden, right? And the idea is, well, we see that, right? We have machine learning. We can look across all the data and say, hey, if you do it a handful of times, that makes sense. That's fine, whatever. If you are doing that consistently, that's fraud, right? Like that is you defrauding your company, and there's some suspicious stuff going on there. And Coupa can identify that and say, hey, check this out. There is an issue with this person or this unknown person that you look through all their stuff and they're like, yeah, I mean, Mike's doing some really weird stuff with all this spend. That's kind of suspicious, right? Maybe we need to go talk to him and see what's going on. It's not just the metric of what's great. It's actually what's underneath it too.
Yeah, I had a wonderful thing where I had 13,000, 14,000 active travelers inside of my travel program. And we used to do something called the cost per mile, right? Fantastic metric in corporate travel programs. And when you found, we used to have, I'd affectionately call them the high flyer club, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so many people coming out of Chicago going to LA on a weekly basis. It's like, okay, there's 145 people that travel from Chicago to LA every week, right? How is it possible that your cost per mile is 4x of the average?
Yeah.
Like, congratulations, you're this month's high flyer, meaning you're picking the worst segments on the worst times. And you're also getting upcharged because you went to the airport and decided to have a cocktail. Maybe you had a client meeting, I don't know. But for me, that kind of reminds me of my high flyer club, which was, hey man, we're watching.
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? And that's a behavior modification, right? It's like, okay, listen, we notice nobody's going to get fired, I don't think, for having, a tendency to have their T&E totals right up against the cusp, right?
Yeah, I think.
But it's certainly a behavior modification to go, hey, by the way, we just noticed, not hint, hint, wink, wink, that your stuff is in the top 5%.
As you might imagine, right, in our world, there's gamification there too, right? To say, hey, this seems a little high, right? And we literally tell them that whenever their expenses are seem a little high. But we do the opposite to say, hey, man, thanks for being frugal. You did a good job whenever they're at, right? And that's positive and people like it, right? And it influences them to spend more responsibly.
Yeah, absolutely. You can always give away a free ticket for somebody to go to France for the weekend. If they're the cheapest person per mile flying, like they're handing out drinks on every flight that they're on.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
All right. Last one I want to get to. We only got 4 or 5 minutes left. We're actually, and this is important. Invoices paid digitally, right? Now, invoices paid digitally. If you chop this up the wrong way, it's like, yeah, no shit. Everybody pays invoices digitally, right? Sure. What's really interesting about this is, and we were talking about this in the pre-ramble, is there's a massive shift or a massive opportunity here for invoices paid digitally associated with V-card deployment and more creative financing things, which makes you look really good to your treasury and finance team, right?
Yeah. Yeah, spot on. I mean, when you and I were talking earlier, virtual cards are no brainer, like you said, right? Like those are very obvious ways that everybody's happy. The end user's happy because you get something without all these extra steps, without all this reconciliation like my P card has. It just does it for me. You got something where the accounts payable team's happy because we're getting a rebate back. The team's happy, we're getting a rebate back. And the supplier's happy because they're getting paid faster rather than 120-day payment terms, right? But even in this topic, this is another one where having a big metric is good to track a trend, but there's so much underneath this. Is it paid with a digital check? Is it paid with an ACH? Is it a wire transfer where it's $50, right, on both sides, 25 on each side of the fence to do a wire? Or is it where you're doing it through an actual cross-border payment system where it's $4, $5, right? And it's much faster, much more efficient, much cheaper. So there's so much underneath this into which rail you're going. And what I think so odd is that everyone leaves this off. We do okay to pay, but it's okay to, procure to okay to pay, right? Rather than getting the whole way to the end here. And they just say, yeah, my ERP does that, it'll be fine, but it's not, right? You're just doing some ACH sometimes. You're not doing cross-border correctly. You're not doing virtual cards correctly, or even digital checks a lot of times.
Yeah, I've told people a lot this over the last couple of years. It's great to procure goods and services. You need to be thinking about how you need to be procuring the way in which their vendor is going to get paid. Because if you procure or if you design the procurement strategy around how they're going to get paid, there's almost as much value in that now as there is in other areas.
Yeah, it's spot on. And just a really quick thing on the virtual cards, I think that's so important, like we talked earlier, is that drives your electronic invoicing because you don't need an invoice for some of those depending on your region and how your controls are, right? That makes that better. It also makes the on approved spend better, right? It makes it so your process efficiencies are quicker. It literally makes all of these metrics better because you have that. Same thing, tail suppliers, right? Go way down because you don't have to onboard them because you can give them a virtual card. So all of these things are drastically improved just because you're starting to use virtual cards.
So listen, we didn't get to all the questions. I apologize to Daryl and Josh, Michael as well. I didn't get to all of them. I'm sorry. We could probably do a 2-hour session on this. I'd love to take these questions and continue them into the channel with Coupa, and John and the team can definitely facilitate those questions for you.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, we're recording this so we get the chat. Tina's put them into the chat, so hopefully we can get those questions out and we can get some people some answers. John, thank you so much for your time today. It's 2 o'clock. I want to wrap. I think this is great content. I think there's a lot of other areas here. Josh, for example, was talking about non-P2P ROI metrics in the form of things like e-sourcing. I think there's a huge opportunity inside of diversity spend, sustainable sourcing spend, all of those areas that I think is probably TBD on the Coupa side. But one of the things that I agree with when you said it is the fact that this to me is a really good resource for people to use if they're first starting out or if they're trying to justify their KPIs to their CFO. So listen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. thank you again to Coupa for being a permanent residence with the Procurement Foundry. You'll see Coupa, if you're Procurement Foundry members, you'll see Coupa at our conferences. You'll see blog posts. MVK, the Chief Procurement Officer, just put out a great blog series on the operating models of procurement. And we've got more to come from our friends at Coupa. So thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Thanks for walking us through this and kind of explaining in the least sales way possible how the heck all of this works. So I really appreciate trying to keep it as TED Talky as possible.
Absolutely.
Right.
I find this stuff fascinating. I appreciate the time. Thanks for having us, right? But really, any other questions, we're happy to help too.
All right, great. Thanks, man. All right, everybody. I'll talk to you soon. We've got a lot of stuff coming up next week. Hey, by the way, if you haven't signed up for the Procurement Foundry conference on June 3rd, associated with digitalization of the sourcing and supply chain space, make sure you get there. You can find it on the website. We're talking about it. It's on Foundry Text. And you gotta come, man. You gotta come. Somebody's giving away a Peloton. We're giving away $500 in Bitcoin. God knows you're gonna need it because your Bitcoin just died. So listen, I'll talk to everybody soon. Thank you again. Bye, John. Take care.
Thank you.